the recording for people that would like to maybe listen to the recording later that couldn't make it tonight. Okay, I'm not going to at this time go into the administrative side of the subject, short of saying a word of warning, and that is that if you are on a face-to-face class, you will be doing a ICE tasks, an assignment, a test, and then of course the exam. You would, in the online space, you'll be doing 2 assignments, ICE and an exam. Now the exam is a open book exam. It's a sit-down, sorry, I think I said an online exam. It's a sit-down exam on campus, but it is open book. And in that, you need to have a word of warning. That is part of the reason why this module didn't do very well last year. Many students thought because it's an open book exam, they would have the test for those that are on face-to-face class is a closed book. The exam is an open book. And they thought in the exam they would be able to look up answers in the textbook. An open book exam doesn't work like that. You'll be writing 100 marks in 120 minutes, and you will not have time to look for answers in your book. So my advice to you is, in terms of the exam purposes, study for the exam. Take your book with, but see your book as a backup rather than your primary information source. Okay. Let's have a look, see what we can do in terms of the actual subject. And that is the textbook. You obviously need the textbook. The module's also on ARC. There is a lot of study material on ARC, and my advice to you is to please go through the work on ARC, do the exercises on ARC. Your lecturers will also upload extra material for you in ARC that you can work with. So please use ARC as your resource, as ARC can really help you and guide you through the module, especially if you're in the online space. ARC is your best friend. Then use the module guide, because the module guide will help and assist you as you work through the work, so that you know that you are busy, that you're following the right work, you know what the module outcomes are, because without knowing what the outcomes are, you're just going to be studying everything without knowing what you're doing. Then there are recommended readings. That's a list of the recommended readings. This comes out of your module guide. So if you look in the module guide, you'll find these recommended readings. And students always say to me, "Sir, I've got to do an assignment, but I don't know where to start. I don't know where to find materials and so on." This is where you start, right? Start with these readings, and from there on, many of these are academic articles. Look at their reference list, look at what they've used, and work your way up from there. But this is a very good start for any of the assignments that you need to do. This is what I was talking about the objectives or the learning unit outcomes. These are placed in your module guide, I believe. Yes, they're also on ARC. But at the end of the day, this is for chapter 1 or learning unit 1. This is what you have to be able to do. So always look at the objectives. I'm not going to read through the objectives. You can pause there and just read through them yourselves. For each learning unit, there are these learning unit outcomes. So at the end of your study period, when you've finished learning unit 1, I'll take, for example, 4, analyze the different economic systems in which a business may operate. Therefore, we can give you a case study. You need to take the case study, read through the case study, and then use what you've learned about the different economic systems to be able to analyze to see what economic system is this specific business using, in which economic system are they operating. So it's essential basically that you do go through the objectives or the learning unit outcomes and make sure that you can meet each one of those outcomes. That's your test for yourself to see, where am I at? Am I up to speed? Do I know? Have I mastered the content of this chapter? If there's any one of the learning unit outcomes or the objectives that you say, "No, I'm not exactly sure I can discuss the 3 types of need-satisfying organizations that exist," then go back into your textbook, revisit that section. Or if you can't find it in the textbook, you say, no, I don't know, I don't, this doesn't make sense to me. Go to your lecturer, approach your lecturer, drop them an email, or go see your lecturer and say to your lecturer, excuse me, ma'am, excuse me, sir, this objective here, where do I find this in the textbook and what are they expecting me to do? Because I don't think I understand that. That is the only way in which you're going to learn, and it's the only way in which you're going to move forward. Right, let's dive straight into it, and let's see what we can do. So when we're looking at business management overall, we need to see it as a field of study and a field of study within the management field. So it's a specific part of management, and it has to do with looking at how businesses run and businesses operate. Obviously, management is a dynamic thing. It changes all the time. It changes as the economy changes. It changes as social circumstances change. It changes over time, but it can have a very rapid change. And I hate to do this, but it's such an excellent example. If we look at what happened to COVID and the lessons that we learned in COVID and new businesses that suddenly appeared, I don't think, for example, things like Checkers 6060 would have been or would be such a big thing if it hadn't been for COVID. I think COVID absolutely made that business model and made it what it is today. But management is dynamic. The landscape in which managers operate changes all the time. That's the one constant that we have in management, and that is change. So therefore, in terms of business management, the requirement and the demands of what happens in business management is changing all the time. What we will be teaching you in your first year in business management may not be valid when you get to your third year. We live in what's called a VUCA world, if you haven't heard the term. Before, I'll have to quickly think, volatile, uncertain, etc., etc. Google VUKA, VUCA world, and you'll see what it is. And that demands of us to be very agile. We need to place ourselves in a position where we understand the basics of what's going on, but as the situation changes, we need to be able to change ourselves and morph into something different so that we can adapt to what's happening within the business world. Are we talking about management and adapting and changing, and management's dynamic and so on? But we're talking business management. So what is a business? An organization or economic system where goods and services are exchanged for one another or for money. So it's simply, you have an organization that has something, and we'll talk about where that has something comes from, that somebody else wants, and that good that you have, you give to somebody else, or it's a service, so you might go mow somebody's lawn, or you might clean their pool, or you might offer them accommodation for an evening. And in that case, it's not a good, it's a service. And this good or service that you have that somebody else wants, we exchange for something. And typically we use money. In the older days, we used the barter system. So I have sheep, you have corn, I want corn, you want sheep, we exchange. So I give you sheep, you give me corn. So now both of us have corn and sheep. But we have, over time, it has evolved that we've changed the sheep or the corn for the proxy of money, and we exchange money for the goods that we want, and money holds certain value. Okay, so businesses can be private, non-profit, or state-owned, right? So there's three different types of ownerships or types of how businesses can operate or for whom they can operate, and they can be formal or informal. Now we'll talk about all of this, so don't worry too much about it now. But the key reason for existence of businesses is that we, as humans, as people of the earth, we have got unlimited needs. We've got the widest range of needs. We want everything. And businesses try to use the limited resources, because remember, businesses don't have access to everything and as much as they want. Their resources are limited, and they use those limited resources to try to satisfy our unlimited needs. So our needs are unlimited, business has got limited needs. Therefore, business has got to be frugal with how they work with what they have. So they must use the stuff that they have as, and I'm talking, I know I'm talking funny, I'm saying stuff and so on, but because we'll get to that. But what the business has, they need to use as economically or as efficiently as possible to satisfy, because they've got a little and they've got to satisfy these unlimited needs that the humans have. So we spoke about formal and informal businesses. So businesses can be formal or informal. And I always say to my classes, how do you start a business? Now, that can be a very complicated process, but it can also be like that. There, I've just started a business. I've had an idea and I've started a business. So now I'm going to run with the business. No registration. I'm not speaking to anybody else. I've decided I'm going to start a business, right? And my business is going to be, I'm going to sit next to the road. I've got a compressor and I'm going to pump up car tires, and I'm going to charge people £5 to pump their 4 tires. Boom, that's it. That's my business. I don't have to register with anybody. I'm not going to speak to anybody. Nothing. I'm just doing this. That's an informal business in the informal sector. It's not registered. I won't pay taxes. I won't report my earnings. None of those things I will do. I'm a totally informal business. On the other, and the informal business is typically, and you'll get to forms of ownership in later lessons and so on, but it's typically a sole proprietor. You are the owner of the business. You don't have any shareholders, nothing. It's just you, me, myself, and I'm running the business. On the other side, a business can be an extremely formal thing, where I register my form of ownership. So I'm probably going to use something like a private company. I register this with the authorities. I also speak to the taxman, and I go to the taxman and I say to the taxman, please listen, I'm earning money. I want to pay my taxes on this money. I don't want you chasing me later and saying you got money and you never paid the taxman. So let me please pay my taxes. And these can be smaller businesses, so entrepreneurial ventures, but typically these are big ventures, like your banks, your fast food chains, your garages, your supermarkets. These are big formal business. Informal businesses are small one-man shows. It might be the guy that goes around cleaning somebody's pools. He might not have a registration, nothing. He's just doing something to keep himself busy. It might be the guy sitting next to on the street corners, and they may simply be selling from the corner of the street, selling some sweets, selling some cigarettes or something like that. That's a totally informal business. So the formal and the informal sector when we look at businesses. So when we look at, and I spoke about the different forms of ownership, I spoke about there being a for-profit business, government or state-owned businesses, and non-profit businesses. So let's have a look at this, and let's have a look at how the for-profit business works. So a profit business, surprise, surprise, what do they want to do? They want to make a profit. Their primary goal is they want to make a profit. How do they do that? They convert what we call the factors of production, get to that later, into products and services. So they have something that they do something with, and it ends up in a product. So, for example, on the screen there, I've got a little example. They take water, flour, salt, whatever. They mix this up, right? They bake this. That's their transformation, and they end up with bread, right? They pay for the raw materials, right? They sell the bread, that gives them money, they can buy more raw materials. But what we need to remember is, so it's an input, transformation, output cycle that we have. But what we need to keep in mind here is that that bread that's coming out, somebody comes along and they buy that bread and they take that bread down the road, and that is their input with some butter, with some tomatoes and some salad and some cold meats, and they make sandwiches out of this. This making the sandwich is the transformation process. They then take these sandwiches and they pack them in a little trolley, and they go around in a business and they sell the sandwiches in the business. So what you need to understand is some people, the output will be the input for the next person. For example, a mine takes ore, they crush it, and they come out with refined ore. The refined ore goes to a refinery. The refinery takes refined ore, they melt it, and their output is gold bars. Gold bars goes to bullion dealers. The bullion dealer gets the gold bar. Their transformation is they chop it up in smaller bits and they sell little bits of gold to jewelers. Jewelers' input is a little bit of gold that they transform into a beautiful ring for you, and their output is the ring. See how one person's output is another person's input. See how every person puts something else and transforms it to make a new output. And understand that every time that person, that for-profit business, these are all for-profit business, every time they do that transformation, the middle bit, take the input, transform it, make an output, every time they do that, they're adding value. And that added value is where their profit comes from, right? Because they're taking an output that has a certain value, they're transforming it, adding value to it, and selling it then. And that the difference between the value in the beginning and the value in the end is the profit that they make. So that is how for-profit business makes money. And these are, it can be Jack's Fish and Chip store in the corner, right? But it can also be large private organizations like the cell phone companies, fast food chains, listed businesses that are publicly listed. That just simply means that they, on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, they allow to sell shares to members of the public, and you and I can buy shares in this company and own a little part of the company. So those are your for-profit organizations. If at any stage you've got a question, raise your hand, just open your mic, just speak, it's fine. I'm happy to be interrupted. Okay, then the second type of need satisfying businesses or types of businesses is the state-owned enterprises. So in South Africa, we've got a couple of state-owned enterprises. Sometimes we refer to them as government organizations. In these, government is the main shareholder. Sometimes there's other shareholders, but typically in South Africa, it's just the government. Think of South African Airways, think of Eskom, for example. These are state-owned. They're owned by the government, run by the government. Typically cost us a lot of money to keep going. And the government basically has various levels of control. It depends on what the organization is. Some organizations are very, very strictly controlled by government. Other organizations, like for instance South African Airlines, are basically allowed to run themselves. They have their own board of directors and they run themselves, but they're state-owned. And government intervenes through their ownership and sometimes gives them an instruction, tells them you have to do this, you cannot do that, we want you to operate like such. And these organizations, these state-owned organizations, are typically organizations that provide essential services to us, right? So for example, the South African Railway Service provides essential transport services. Eskom provides essential electrical services to us. And these are services that are essential for the country to be able to run as a functioning entity. And that is why the state is taking control of those businesses. And when we talk about the economies just now, or the different economic systems, we will then also see where this fits into the economic systems. The last form of ownership that I want to talk to you about are the non-profit organizations. So a non-profit organization doesn't have profit as its main target, although it would make a profit, and I'll explain to you how that works and what it does with the profit. The key part is where we had a private owned for-profit organization. In those organizations, we do that transformation process, and that transformation process leads to a profit. And I, as the owner of that private organization, want to share in the profit. In a non-profit, I, as the owner, do not share in the profit. So the profit is taken, placed back into the company. Non-profit organizations are typically doing charitable work or in service of the community, trying to either alleviate some kind of communal problem, whether it is diabetes, whether it is weak eyesight, whether it is helping the elderly, or some environmental thing, to try to protect endangered wildlife species. So it's always something to do with some kind of a charity, and the profit that they make is not distributed to the owners or the people that have started the organization. It's plowed back, and the profits are all used in pursuance of whatever it is that we do. So they've got the South African Red Cross there as an example. So if the Red Cross does a course, for example, and they do a lot of first aid courses and so on, it costs them 500 Rand to run a course. They charge you 750 Rand. That 250 Rands will be applied back into the organization and might be used to do a community outreach project where they go into the community and they offer free health services to the community. So the non-profit organizations, we always need to keep in mind they will make a profit. And whether they're making a profit from donations that you give them, or whether they're making a profit from services that they provide, doesn't really matter. It's not neither here nor there. The fact of the matter is, the profit is simply not shared. The profit is rather plowed back into the organization. So, yeah, things get tricky now. So here are the 4 elements of business. Now, let me give you a tip. When you are studying for a test or exam, whatever, make sure that when you're studying the headings. You understand that these are the 4 elements of business. Because later we're going to talk about the 4 something else's. And then when they ask you this question, you're going to say, which 4 things are these? So make sure you remember the elements of business are humans, goods and services, profit and loss, and the concept of exchange. So that if you get asked a question about this, if you get asked a question about this, you remember which one it is and you can answer the question successfully. So there are 4 elements to a business. There's 4 things that makes the business tick. Firstly, it's the humans. So any business will have some humans working for it. Even if it's a IT business or something like that, there'll still be humans involved somewhere in that business. The key human will be the entrepreneur, the person that starts the business, especially if it's a smaller company, recently started up. They will be one of the key driving forces within the business. They will be the person that determines the direction of the business. They will be the person that gives instruction to the other people in the organization, the staff, the people that work in the organization, and they will be the person that gives the leadership to make sure that whatever we're doing in servicing our customers, in trying to achieve our organizational goals, they are the person that drives it. But even later on, when the company grows and it becomes much larger, and the entrepreneur might not be involved anymore, so it might get to the point where the company has grown to the stage that the person who started it says, no, look, this is too big for me, and there's a lot of money there, so I'm going to sell the company and I'm now going to retire because I've put in the hard work. Then the managers will take over that role of guidance. But any company must have a human element to it to give guidance, to give direction, and to make sure that the company is run successfully. Next are your goods and services. So what are the goods and services that go into the business? Natural resources, human resources again, but this is as a part of making stuff, and then your capital resources. You need those things to make sure that the company can run properly. the profit loss principle. So in other words, all organizations, as I said earlier, all organizations, whether it is state-owned, non-profit or for-profit, they all want to make a profit in one way or another. In other words, the idea is that in an organization, there'll always be the element of profit or loss. In other words, simply put, is your expenditures more or less than your income? We always obviously want our expenditures to be less because we want to make more money than we put into the company, especially if it's a private owned company, because we want to then make the profit, because that profit is what we get as a return as an entrepreneur for investing our capital in the business. If I'm buying shares in a company that's listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, the idea behind the reason why I'm buying those shares is that I'm hoping that the shares are going to become more valuable because the company is going to do better and better and make a bigger profit. And then when I sell my shares, I'm making a profit. The profit motive is always there. And then the last thing that's always there that goes with that profit and loss is the idea of exchange. We taking money or something and we exchanging it for something else. So we would have a product that we would sell, we would pass this on to somebody else, and that person would give us something else in return. Whether that something else is money, or we might make a barter deal and we might say, you know what, you actually have something that I want, I have something that you need, let's exchange it. A recent example is a guy I know. He is a bookkeeper, so he does bookkeeping, taxes, those type of things. And he made an arrangement with a person who wanted to use his services. The guy is a installer of solar systems, and he said to the guy, okay, let's make this deal. I will do your books, all your taxes, everything for 1 year for free, if you install a solar system for me on my house. So the solar company came, they installed the solar system. Guy was very happy. He doesn't have to pay all that money to Eskom anymore. And he did their books for 1 year without paying. The following year, because they were very happy with his services, they said, no, look, we want to still keep you on and we'll pay you for this year because, I mean, we've given you a solar system. So the following year, it was a normal financial transaction as you and I would expect transactions that we are used to. But the point I'm trying to make is the concept of exchange is not a concept that has completely disappeared. You do still find it. And interestingly enough, in the entrepreneurial world, you find it quite a lot. You find that entrepreneurs exchange, especially if I offer a service or I have a product that you really want and you've got something that you can offer me. Entrepreneurs lots of times will do deals with each other and say, listen, I'll give you this, I'll do this thing for you, and then you give me that, or we exchange products or whatever the case may be. Because entrepreneurs are by their nature, they're frugal, and they would rather not spend money because they've got a business that they're running, and they'd rather take the money that they're making, the little bit of money that they're making, and put it back in that business. Okay. I'm not going to go through this table. This is table 1.1 in your textbook. This is the 4 elements of business. It is exactly the same thing as what I've explained here. This is just a table giving more details and some examples to it. Please take your time, go look for that table in your textbook, work through that table. It just gives you a better idea and explains it more than the previous diagram does. So, in terms of an organization, what does business management mean? So the purpose of business management is to, and I'm going to read this sentence out, is to produce the maximum amount of goods in the shortest possible time at the lowest possible cost and at the right level of quality, thereby ensuring maximum profits. Right. So let's break this down. Let's look at what do these words mean. So the first thing that we have is the maximum amount of goods. So we want to be as productive as possible. So with whatever we have, we want to be able to produce as much as possible. Why? Why do we want to produce as much as possible? Well, simply the more we produce, the more we can sell. The more we can sell, the more money we're going to make, right? And is that not, after all, one of the key reasons why we have a business, it is to make money. And you can't make money if you don't have enough goods to sell. Well, you can make money, but the question that I ask is, will you be making enough money if you don't make as much goods as possible? The next thing is in the shortest possible time. So we want to turn around our goods. That input transformation output process I was talking about earlier, we want that to happen as fast as possible. And there's a number of reasons for that. But one of the key reasons is the faster we take raw materials and change them into something we can sell, the quicker we can make money. But there's another reason. As your business grows, you are going to be able to make deals with your suppliers, hopefully. And hopefully your suppliers are going to start giving you what we call a credit line. Credit line simply means this. Your suppliers are going to say to you, I will give you these raw materials. You don't have to pay me now. Pay me in 30 days. And when you pay them in 30 days and you regularly pay them in 30 days, you might be able to negotiate 60 days or even 120 days before you have to pay your account. Now think about this. I go to somebody and I get raw materials. Let's say I pay 100 Rand for the raw materials, except I don't pay. I've got 30 days to pay them. I take the raw materials, I transform them into a product, and I sell my 100 Rands worth of raw materials that I've now transformed for 200 Rand. So now I have 200 Rand in my pocket. That's a week later. We know 100 Rand belongs to that company that gave me my raw materials on credit, and I've got to give them 100 Rand. But what I can do is I can now go take the 200 Rand, go buy cash raw materials, convert them and sell them for 400 Rand. Now we're 2 weeks later. And I can keep doing that. And at the end of the month cycle, right, I've got 1,600 Rand, I think. But it's not cost me any money because I've taken their 100 Rand raw materials, I've transformed it several times, bought more raw materials, transformed again, more raw materials, transformed again, and I'm actually trading on their account. At the end of the 30 days, I say, oh, by the way, thank you, there's your 100 Rand back. But I keep all the profits that I've made by using their capital to run my business. But you can only do that if you do the transformation in the shortest possible time. Lowest possible cost. Obviously, that goes with the maximum profits in the next sentence. So the lower you can keep your costs, the higher your profit margin, right? So if you're selling something for 200 Rand and your cost is 100 Rand, then obviously you make 100 Rand profit. But if you can bring your 100 Rand cost down to 80 Rand, you can still sell it for 200. Now suddenly you're making 120 Rand profit. So you've increased your profit margin by dropping the price of production rather than increasing the sales price. Because if you increase the sales price, your market might say to you, no, that's getting a bit too expensive. We're not going to buy as many products. And then your whole argument around producing the maximum of goods falls flat because you can't sell those maximum of goods. So that's one of the reasons why you want to do the lowest possible cost. And then, now note the last bit, the right level of quality, not the best quality. Now, people always say to me, but hang on, Carl, I thought we must make the best possible product. Yes, it's nice to make the best possible product, but once again, you need to go look at your market and what can your market take. Because in many cases, there's a market for a different quality of product, and you must determine what is the right level of quality for your market. And if you say, no, nonsense, people want the best possible product, I will invite you to join me around about the end of the month, and we'll go down to our local Chinatown, and we'll walk through the Chinatown with all the hundreds of other people that are buying products there. And I will say to you, do you think that these people are here because these products here are the best quality product? No, It's probably the right level of quality for the amount of money that the people want to spend. I'm not saying Chinese products are junk. There's a heck of a lot of really, really good Chinese products. I'm just saying the typical mass-produced Chinese products that we get in South Africa are cheaper and of a lesser level of quality, but the right level of quality for the amount of money that people want to spend. If you do all of those things, you will maximize your profits. So the purpose of the business, thus, is to get the maximum amount of goods in the shortest possible time at the lowest possible good at the right level of quality for the end goal to maximize our profits. Business management as a field of study focuses on the organization in the economy. It looks at the limited use of resources and to meet the needs of society. So that's the field of study. The purpose at the top is what we try to do in an organization. The bottom part here, the field of study, is what we're busy learning about when we study business management in an organization. Okay. So we're just going to wet our beaks here in terms of entrepreneurship. The second chapter that we'll do, which I will deal with on next Monday, deals completely with entrepreneurship. But we can't really convincingly tell ourselves that we're looking at business management, but we're not looking at the origins of business. And the origins of business is entrepreneurship. And entrepreneurship, in essence, is somebody that takes a calculated risk to start a new business, a new venture, and with the intention of making a profit, with the intention of making money. We need to be very careful about this. We have the sense that entrepreneurs are massive risk takers. No, massive risk takers go to the casino and put all their money on red. What the entrepreneur does, the entrepreneur evaluates the opportunity. And once they've evaluated the opportunity, they say, how much risk is there involved in this opportunity? And what is the potential reward I can get out of this opportunity? The risk-reward ratio lets them then calculate the risk. And then they say, this is worth my while. I will take that amount of risk because and if the reward part is very low, the risk they'll take is a very low amount of risk. They're not going to say, oh, well, I'm going to do this. Maybe I'll make 10% more money, but I can lose my house. That's a silly risk to take. If they see that the risk-reward ratio is proportionally right, they can make, for the amount of risk they've got to take, they can make the right amount of money, then they'll say, yes, this is a go. This is something I want to do because this is something that has the potential to really make me a lot of money. So that's why we never say entrepreneurs take risk. We say entrepreneurs take a calculated risk because they're not gamblers. They're actually people that are very careful in what businesses they start, and they make sure that the business is worth their while, so that they know that they're actually going to make some money out of this. Okay, then the governments world over, and unfortunately in South Africa we do quite weak. We don't do as well as we should do in entrepreneurship. Sorry, but entrepreneurs are very, very important for our country and for any country because they're the people that drive economic growth. Now, how do they drive economic growth? And I'm actually going to deal with all three: drive economic growth, prosperity, and reduce unemployment. I'm going to deal with these as a package. So when an entrepreneur starts a business, it's typically not very long. The business is growing, and it's not very long before they start employing people. So that reduces unemployment. Now, our government, in my opinion, has made a mistake because they think government must create jobs. It's not the role of government to create a job, or to create jobs in the economy. It's the role of government to create an environment in which jobs can be created. It's the role of the entrepreneur and the business people to create those jobs. So I start a little business. I've got 1, 2, 3 people working for me, and suddenly next thing I've got person 4, 5, 6 working. The next thing I've got 12. The next thing I have 20 people working for me. Because my business is growing, I took my calculated risk, and things are going well. Those people I've taken out of unemployment. Typically, they're now working for me. I pay them a salary, right? What do they do with the salary? They take the salary, and let's take this as a limited example. They take the salary and they go down the street and they spend it all in that one supermarket down the street. That one supermarket suddenly has 20 more customers. The problem is they're not geared for 20 more customers. So they need to employ a couple more people to fill their shelves, to ring up the tills, to deal with these 20 people that suddenly have become their customers. So now they also employ more people. They're putting money in those people's pockets. Those people are also spending money. And that is how economies grow. Economies can only grow if you have more employment, because more employment means people have put more money in their pockets. More money in their pockets drives economic growth. If economic growth is driven and the economy grows, we all prosper. It's better for all of us. We all make more money and we all live better lives. And that is the crucial role that entrepreneurs play in our economy. And that is why governments should do everything in power to encourage entrepreneurs. We unfortunately, our approach in the country is totally wrong, how we approach entrepreneurship. Even at a school level, many of you would have had entrepreneurs days at school. And most schools' entrepreneurs day is nothing else except mommy or daddy giving you some money, you buying some stuff, selling them and sticking the money in your pocket and walking away. That's not an entrepreneurship day. That's a different way of giving pocket money. What an entrepreneurship day is you using some capital to source something which you can sell, taking the money, putting the money back in, buying more products, selling more. It's a continuous process. It's not a once-off happening. And we unfortunately, we treat that because we want to tick the box and say we've had an entrepreneurship day, when actually we've just redistributed pocket money in a different manner. Okay, now we come to the 4 factors of production. Remember I mentioned earlier, study the headings. So factors of production, and the previous one that we looked at, and I just want to show you again, just remind you, the 4 elements of business. Those are the 4 elements of business, but they're not the 4 factors of production. 4 factors of production is the things we need to be able to make something in the organization. That input, transformation, output process, what do we need to be able to run that? And you'll see they're very similar, but they're not the same. And students always get confused when they ask these 2, and they always answer, half the class answers the wrong one. So the factors of production: natural resources, human resources, capital, and entrepreneurship. And let me say right now, entrepreneurship equals knowledge. Knowledge is sometimes, and some people see knowledge as the additional factor of production. So our natural resources, land, water, air, minerals, etc., are split into 2 categories: renewable natural resources and non-renewables. So if it's something like air or water that will replenish itself, it's a renewable. Wood is another one. We can grow more. We can't grow more minerals. Minerals take thousands, hundreds of thousands of years. So that's a non-renewable natural resource, while the ones that we can grow are renewable natural resources. Human resources. Human resources are basically our labor. It is the people that work for us. And labor, you must see labor in 2 ways, because labor can either be a manual labor, working with your hands, but labor can also be working with your head. So we shouldn't just see labor as people standing there with a pick and shovel. It's also the bank, the people working in the bank, the people, the people doing the big sums in insurance industries. That's also labor that helps in this transformation process. Then capital is capital is a couple of things. Capital is money. We talk about you need a capital amount to start a business. But in the context of the factors of prediction, we see the end results of the capital. We see the buildings and machinery that we've bought, the building in which we house our factory, as well as the machinery inside the factory that takes our natural resources and under the guidance of human beings transforms them. So we've got this big factory where we make shoes, right? So our capital goods is the factory building, and it is the machines to work the leather with. Our natural resources are leather, which is a renewable resource, and we use our human beings to use the capital, the machines, to cut the leather and to stitch them together. The last factor of prediction is the entrepreneurship. That's the person that has taken all three of these other productions and put them together, who's taken that calculated risk, who said, I'm prepared to open this factory for shoes because in this greater area, there's nobody else that makes shoes. And for starters, I know there's 5 schools here. Where are they going to get these school shoes from? My factory is going to make these school shoes. So that person has gone out, sourced the capital to buy the building and the equipment, right? Appointed the people and trained the people to be able to work those capital equipment, and has gone out and sourced the raw materials, the leather and glue and all of this stuff that's needed to make the shoes. And they standing at the top of this, and they orchestrating all of this because they put their money in, they accepting the risk. And when these things sell, they will enjoy the profit as a reward. They will be paid from the profits. So to do all of that, they need a certain level of knowledge. And the knowledge could be simply entrepreneurial knowledge, to know how to run a business, but it might be a very specific type of knowledge. I'm dealing with an honors student of mine now who's part of a group of people that are planning to start a chlorine plant to manufacture chlorine. And the fact of the matter is that is quite heavy engineering, and you need quite a lot of knowledge. So it's not just any engineer or any entrepreneur or any engineer for that matter. But it's not just any entrepreneur that said, okay, quickly, I'm just going to start a nice plant and we're going to manufacture chlorine. You need the knowledge. And that's why if you read your textbook and they talk about the factors of production, they almost want to put knowledge as an additional factor of production out on the side there. Okay, now putting ourselves in a different place, we're looking now at Industrial Revolution. We're looking at how does the fourth Industrial Revolution affect our businesses. So there's been a number of industrial revolutions over the time. The first Industrial Revolution was the mechanization of steam by using steam and water power. In other words, way back when, people were doing everything with their hands, and they were basically, there's a term, they call it crofting. So they had their little house and they were making, or cottage industry. You had a couple of sheep out there. You went out there, shared the sheep, brought the sheep in, brought the wool into the house. Now you took the wool, wove it into to yarn or into knitting wool, and you sat there with your needles and you knitted jerseys and put jerseys together, and that's what you sold, right? The next guy down the road, he didn't have any sheep, but he had corn. So he would take the corn, he would harvest his corn, he'd put the corn through a little mill that he had, and he would make flour and he would sell flour. And all of this was done by manual labor. Then somebody said, hang on a moment. There's a river that runs by here, and if I put a big water wheel in that river, the river will turn the water wheel, and I can put a shaft on that, and that turning motion that I have in my house, I can use that to spin my wool, so that I'm able to make proper wool, and I can make a lot more wool. And maybe instead of me taking the wool and making jerseys, I can sell the wool on to other people, and I will only make it, but I'll buy everybody around me, I'll buy all their wool, and I'll use this water wheel that I've designed to drive my spinning machine so that I can make more wool. The next person said, but hang on, if he can use water that way, what if I boil the water and I use steam? I can maybe make a bigger machine, a stronger machine to mill my flour, and I can mill my flour. And that was the first industrial revolution that mechanized a lot of the things that we do. Next one, down the line, people said, but hang on, let's move out of these little crofts. Let's get a big factory. And we put up lots of water wheels, and then we can make lots more. And our factory, instead of one person producing a little bit of wool, we will mass produce it and we make a lot of wool. And then electricity was discovered. So we didn't need a water wheel anymore. We had the ability where we used to with things like water wheels and steam, we had to be very close to the energy source. We now had the ability to transfer energy over long distances via electricity. So now I could put my factory anywhere I wanted to. So I didn't have to have water close by. So now I could take my factory and put it in the middle of the farm where all the sheep are, and I could now mass produce wool. Then and mass production obviously ended up making mass produced motor cars, aeroplanes, everything. And then the third industrial revolution came around, and I actually lived through it, and we to a certain extent still living through it, and that's the electronic and IT systems, where we now had electronic systems that could manage the whole process. And we have one person standing pushing a couple of buttons, and all this mechanization has taken place, and all these machines do everything, and basically they're controlled by these computers. And now the fourth industrial revolution that we're busy entering now is how we take those cyber physical systems. AI is playing a big part of this, but how do we integrate all of the IT knowledge, the cyber systems, the networking systems that we have via the internet? How do we integrate that to make businesses and things happen easier? A simple example, you get fridges now already. I don't know if any are available in South Africa, but they're definitely available overseas, that will see your milk is low. And it will then order milk from the store automatically, and the milk will be delivered to your house via a service like Checker 6060 or something like that. So the fridge is connected to the internet, like talk about the Internet of Things, and that automatically places an order as and when necessary. And you get home, you say, oh, there's milk, my milk must be finishing, put the milk in the fridge, boom, finished. The question is, and now something that people spoke about, but they didn't think it's going to happen as quickly as it's happened, is AI that's come back, because AI has been the missing link, and that missing link has now been filled. So the question is that successful businesses in the future, how do we integrate our human resources and technology with each other to let us go forward faster? And how does the manager manage their people, but also the technology, and merge those two management skills? And there's certain questions we need to ask of managers. There's 5 key things that they say we need to figure out. So how will the effectiveness and success of managers be measured? Effectiveness, being able to do the right thing. How would we measure that in this new age? How are we going to know if managers are doing their job? How do we know that our management team can navigate this fourth industrial revolution? What are the skill sets that they're going to need? How are we going to make sure that they have those skill sets? How do we build those skill sets? With not only within the managers, within the teams? That's the next question. What opportunities should managers be aware of, and what risks should they be aware of as technology changes the organization's processes and those of their suppliers and customers? And what we're asking in this question is, what are the big things that are going to change? Now, I said earlier, the one thing we're certain about is change. Now, the fourth industrial revolution will change a lot of things. We need to figure out what it's going to change. And we need to be able to say to ourselves, so if that changes, how does that change my business? How does it change my risk profile? that calculated risk that I take as the entrepreneur to start this business, has the risk become too much? Or are these things in the fourth industrial revolution actually going to reduce my risk? Is it actually going to make life easier for me? Can I therefore use this as an expansion opportunity? And then how will the vision, mission, and values and strategy of the organization be affected? And that's what I've moved into now, talking about that, saying, do we see this as a threat to our business? Is this the time that we want to say to ourselves, now we need to exit because the risk has become too high? Or do we say to ourselves, heck, this is such a good opportunity for us. Now we need to expand. We need to leverage off these things that are happening, these technological advances. We need to leave off them and move our business forward and move it fast forward before our competitors move forward. Because remember, we always want to try to be a step ahead of our competitors. So the implications of the fourth industrial revolution on businesses, we will probably replace humans in a lot of the things, but that means we will open human time to do other things. So other tasks and not the manual tasks they're currently doing. We'll find that more and more we're getting digital delivery of products. In other words, a simple way to talk about that is books. You won't physically buy books anymore. You will have them delivered electronically, so you'll have an electronic book. If you think of it, your generation, you've probably never bought music in the physical form. I grew up in the days that we bought big records, the vinyl records that have become back in vogue. That is what I grew up with. That's how you bought music. You didn't want to buy, we had cassette tapes, you didn't want to buy a cassette tape because cassette tapes are stretched and tall. You wanted to buy vinyl records. And then we went over to CDs. Now we don't do that anymore. We buy our music digitally and we download the music. But that's going to go into different things. The technology is already there that you would be able to go onto a website, look at different designs of shoes and design a shoe for yourself. Now you're going to say, yes, so but that's there already. I can do it with Nike. Nike allows me to. That's true. But then what you would do is you'll press a button and that shoe would be printed in your house on a 3D printer. And it wouldn't be printed in a size, I wear a size 13, I'm rather a big boy. It wouldn't be printed in a size 13, it would be printed in a size Carl, because my foot would be scanned and the shoe would be printed to fit my exact foot, which probably isn't a 13, but that's the closest out of the normal sizes that fit me. But I'm probably a 12 and a 3/4. And but I wear a 13 because my feet are wide, for example. But so this shoe that I've now taken the design elements of a website and put together will be printed in those materials, in those colors, in my house. So I'll have digital delivery of my shoes. And that again opens business opportunities for people. This type of thing will minimize the environmental impact. You can think the difference between printing something on a 3D printer and having the factory I used in the previous example, the shoe factory, the amount of pollution that shoe factory is going to make, the amount of wasted materials with offcuts and all of that that's going to be generated by that versus your 3D printer at your home printing the shoe. That alone tells you how the impact of the environment is going to be reduced. Also, because there's not that much waste, you can make more profit as the organization. You're probably going to end up asking slightly more, especially initially when shoe printing, for example, is new. And eventually, you're probably going to ask a little bit less than you're currently asking. But the fact of the matter is, you're not physically doing something, so you're just simply designing things, and that means that you are able to make a bigger profit, although you might be selling for a cheaper price. And the exchange element would look different because we'll probably be using blockchain as part of our payment system, and we'll do all payments probably electronically, and in the long run, money as we know it, the cash money that we carry in our wallets, probably going to disappear. It's already busy disappearing. There's more information on this on table 1.3 in your textbook. Okay, we need to do the three economic system, four economic systems. Sorry, yeah, I think it's four. But firstly, we need to look at the central economic questions that determines your economic questions. What is it that we're going to produce as a entity, as a country? What is it that we're trying to produce? What are we going to use to produce this? In other words, what is our raw material? And who's going to use this product? Who's going to buy it? Those are the three key elements that you need to ask to determine an economic system. So the economic system of a country is basically determined by us, right? By us as the people of the country. And this is normally very closely tied to our political systems. And depending on who you vote for politically will result in the type of economic system you have. But the people of the country are the ones that determine the economic system. There are three questions. And this is a rough question, and then we'll do the formalized questions. So what products and services are going to be produced and in what quantities? In other words, sorry, this is the previous question is just much more formalized. What products and services are going to be produced and in what quantities? This is the output question. So what is it that we're going to make? And the question is, who decides that? Who asks that question and who decides it? Because that has an influence in terms of what the economic system is that we're going to use. How will the products and services be produced, or what quantities of scarce resources, remember our resources that we are always scarce, will be used? That's the input question. What will be used to manufacture these things, and where will this come from? Once again, who decides this? And then who will get these products? Who will these be distributed to solve the so-called distribution question? How much will people get? And where will that production come from? How will this happen? And if we answer those three questions, we end up with the economic system. So we have four economic systems. In broad, the traditional economic system, the command economic system, the market economic system, and the mixed economic system. Now, you may have approached this differently when you were at school, and you might have learned about capitalism, communism, and socialism. So your mixed is sort of socialism, your market economy is sort of capitalism, and your command economy is sort of communism. The traditional economic system is the traditional African systems. This is the indigenous ways of doing, which is still, in a lot of the more rural areas, a lot of this is still practiced, and it's still done in a very traditional way. So people still produce the same goods as they traditionally produced. The same goods are produced by the same families, and the same people play the same roles, and the same methods of production are used, and it's very traditional, and it almost operates outside of the formal economic systems of a country. We find this all over the world in rural areas, that people still have their old traditional economies, and they run with that economic system, which is completely separated of the more formal economic systems. So the command economic system. At communist, some would call it socialist. I prefer to call it communist. The state makes the decision. So the state says, what are we going to produce? The state determines the volumes of production. The state says, in this factory, we're going to produce this because we need this for this reason. And that's just going to happen. There's no choice about it. It happens. The state decides how we're going to produce it. Are we going to use lots of manual labor? Are we going to bring in a lot of machines? Are we going to do this out in a rural area, or are we doing this in the middle of the city? And then the state decides, where do these goods go to? Right? Where do these goods end up? Do they go to a shop? Are they allocated to a specific group of people? How does this work? Now, there's a couple of these countries left. There's not many left. The Korea, and I can never remember, I think it's the North Korea, never remember if it's North or South, is one that is strictly communist. Cuba is communist-ish, although they're starting to relax. Russia has completely relaxed already, although formally they're still communist. You look at a country like China, but they've also got a capitalist economy going much more than they used to have. Even countries like Ethiopia, who supposedly is communist, isn't as communist as they used to be. Then we have the market economy. So this is now the other end, where and obviously with the command economic system, government has a big influence. Government influences and government determines, and government basically decides everything, and there isn't a real private sector. In the market economic system, the private sector determines everything, and there's minimal government interference. So as it says there, any institution can bring buyers and sellers into contact with each other. So there are buyers, there are sellers, so there are producers who sell their products, and anybody can decide what they want to produce and how much of it they want to produce, and they can take this and sell it to anyone they want to. The price is supposedly determined by the buyer and the seller, but the market determines the price. And there's market forces that play a role. So in other words, if there's a product and there's a shortage of the product, the price will go up, right? And so as supply goes down and demand rises, the price goes up. This is something you'll be taught in economics. If there's a lot of this product, there's a lot of supply, oversupply, then typically demand will start going down, and with that, the price goes down. So as if there's a lots of something, the price is cheaper. If there's a little of something, the price is more expensive. And that we say the market determines the price, because the market determines whether there's a saturation in the market, whether there's a lot of a product, and then the product isn't worth as much. If there's very little of a product, it's worth a lot more. If you look at, and I'll give you two fruits, blueberries and avocado pears. You look at it when it's blueberry seasons, you can buy a little tub of blueberries like this for $10. Now you're probably paying $40 for it, for a small tub like that. Avocado pears, the same thing. When it's high season, they're relatively cheap, although they have become a bit more expensive over time. But when it's the low season, they're really expensive. That's when you're paying 30, 40 rands for a single avo. And in this market economic system, anybody may own anything, anybody may work anywhere where they choose to work, and anybody may sell and do as they want to. Minimal government interference. As a matter of fact, in its purest form, there should be no government interference. So all goods, all services are provided by the private sector. Are there any countries like that in the world? No, not a pure market economic system. Because in that system, even the roads, the hospitals, every single thing would have to be provided by private sector. So even in the countries that we see as the most market-driven countries, some of the European countries, America, the USA, even the government still has a sort of role, and they do some of the bigger projects government take on. And then we have the mixed economic system. It's a combination of all three of the others, although one system is typically dominant. So if you look at South Africa, we've got a mixed economic system, because there's elements of the command, we have elements of the traditional. So for instance, if you look at the command, government builds all big roads. Government runs the big hospitals. Yes, we've got a strong private sector healthcare, but government basically runs all the big hospitals. Government supplies us with electricity. Government supplies us with water. So all of those are supplied by government. So there's an element of the command, but If we look at our retail sector, it's all market economy. You decide what you want to sell, you decide what you want to manufacture, you decide to determine the price, you determine the market where you want to sell it. So that's completely a market economy, and that's why we say South Africa's got a mixed economic system, where we've got elements of all three of these, but it's in essence a free market system, and there's very few things that you can't even compete with government with. There's a couple of private roads. I know of one up here on the west coast of the Cape Province, which is a private toll road. It's a private company that's built the road through their property. And if you want to get from, yes, now I must remember the terms, from Lambert's Bay to Elands Bay, from Elands Bay to Lambert's Bay, whatever. In between them, the fastest road is a private toll road. Pay the guys, you drive on their gravel road. That's the fastest road to get, or you've got to do a massive detour on government roads. So that's an example of, even in this mixed economic system where we have this strong command element, there are still people that build their own roads. And there's very few things in our mixed economy that we're not allowed to supply. Until very recently, it was illegal to supply electricity, for example. So if I had excess electricity from a solar panel, I was not allowed to put it in the lead and send it to my neighbor next door. But that now even has been changed. So although we still have the command elements in it, we have a very strong market economic system. So folks know the difference between those systems in a test situation. Chances are you'll get asked to look at a case study and either identify what the economic system is in the case study, or suggest how, in which economic system this business that they named in the case study would do the best. So they'll give you a case study of somebody who's busy starting to make dresses, for example, and you then said that you then asked to, if you could choose one of the economic systems for this person to operate in, which one would you choose and why would you choose it? And then you've got to determine, typically it'll be something like the market economy, because the person making the dresses would be able to sell them to anybody. He would be able to ask whatever price he wants to. He would be able to determine his how much money he's going to make out of the dresses that he's made. So therefore the market economy. So you basically motivate why you're choosing that economic system. Mostly it tends to be market or mixed, tends to be the right type of answer. Folks, I think we've worked through the first chapter, Unit 1. I've just put this up again. These are the objectives. So these are the learning unit outcomes that you find right in the beginning in ARC, or you find them in your module guide. And as I said at the beginning, if you go through each one of these now, after having gone through the session, for instance, if you look at number 4, analyze the different economic system in which a business may operate. We just looked at that. The 4th industrial revolution is number 6, and so on. And you'll see all of these questions have been answered within the unit. And when you have done the unit, you need to make sure that when you start looking at a unit, you must look at all the learning outcomes or the objectives of that unit and make sure you understand what they are. And then when you've completed a chapter, when you've studied that chapter, you must go back to those and make sure you understand all of those. Folks, if there's no questions, that's the end. I wish you a good evening. The next session will be next Monday, 6 o'clock, and I will be doing the second learning unit in that chapter entitled, so we'll look at that. Thanks, Masego. Enjoy your evening. Hopefully I'll see you next week. Thanks, guys. Cheers.